This couldn't be the man she was supposed to marry. Cecily Vane stood at the edge of the gravel road with one battered suitcase and a name written on a folded slip of paper, a name she'd repeated to herself the entire bus ride from Edmonton, like a prayer she didn't quite believe in. The property stretched in every direction, flat at first, then rolling into something greener than she'd expected for northern Alberta in late October. The sky was enormous here. It pressed down on everything. She'd imagined a farmhouse. She'd imagined curtains in the windows. Maybe a dog on the porch. She'd imagined someone who looked, at the very minimum, like he was expecting her. The man leaning against the fence post was not looking at her. He was looking at the field. He had the posture of someone who had decided, years ago, that the world had nothing much new to offer him, and he'd been right every time since. His name was Aldgate, 41 years old, widowed. 800 acres of cattle land south of High Prairie, a little money that didn't show, and apparently, according to the agency that had arranged all of this, a willingness to try. Cecily had her doubts about that willingness. She walked toward him because there was nothing else to do. The bus had already gone. "Mr. Aldgate," she said. He turned, and for just a moment, one unguarded second before he caught himself, something moved across his face. Not attraction, exactly. More like a man who had been handed something he didn't know how to hold. "You're Cecily," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't warm, either. "I am." He looked at the suitcase. He looked at her boots, which were city boots, totally wrong for this. He looked back at the field. "House is that way," he said. She followed him in silence, and the silence said everything about the next 3 months. Cecily had not come to Alberta because her life was going well. She'd spent 6 years in Calgary, building something that turned out, in the end, to belong mostly to someone else. The restaurant job. The apartment whose lease was in his name. The friends who'd quietly chosen sides after Marcus left, which was everyone except her cousin Petra, who lived in Saskatoon and was busy with twins. She was 29 years old, and she had started over before, after her mother's illness, after university, after the summer job in Vancouver that turned into 2 years. But this felt different. This felt like the kind of starting over that required a different geography entirely. The agency had called it a companionship arrangement. She'd called it desperation until she signed the papers, and then she'd started calling it a fresh start, because the paperwork was done, and there was no use being honest with herself about it. The terms were plain. 6 months on the property, help with household management, bookkeeping if she was willing, and basic companionship. Meals together, the appearance of a functioning household for the bank review in February. That would determine whether Aldgate kept his land. In exchange, accommodation, a modest monthly payment, and at the end of 6 months, a decision by both parties about whether to continue. The agency called it a trial period. Cecily called it a job interview that lasted half a year. What she had not expected was the house. It was clean. That surprised her. Not staged clean, not woman clean. It was the particular clean of a man who had made peace with doing things himself and done them adequately. There were no curtains. There were good boots by the door in 3 sizes, the smallest 2 pairs coated in old mud, which meant children, or had meant children at some point. There was a shelf of paperbacks in the kitchen, mostly westerns, and 1 copy of The Stone Angel that looked genuinely read. She stood in front of that shelf for a moment. "That was Ruth's," Cord said from behind her, meaning the book. She didn't touch it. "Your wife?" "Yes." "How long ago?" 4 years. He went to the stove. He didn't say anything else about Ruth, and Cecily didn't ask. There are questions you can feel the shape of, where they end and where they'd take you, and that was one of them. Dinner was stew from something he'd already had simmering. He served it without ceremony. They ate at a table that had been built for more people than were sitting at it, and Cecily thought about the small pairs of boots by the door. "Your children," she said. "The agency mentioned, they're with my sister in Peace River. School's better there. They'll be here on weekends when the roads are good." "How old?" "Dilia's 9, Owen's 7. She nodded. She ate. Outside, the wind came in off the fields and pressed against the windows like it was checking whether they'd hold. "You don't have to be nervous," Cord said. He was looking at his bowl. "I'm not nervous," she said, which was not entirely true. "You're eating like you're nervous." She looked down. She'd been methodically sorting the carrots to one side of the bowl. It was a habit from childhood she'd never broken. She stopped doing it. "I'm careful," she said. "That's different." He almost smiled. It was the smallest possible version of a smile. the kind that happens in the muscles around the eyes before the mouth is consulted. But she caught it, and it was the first real thing she'd seen in him. The first week was geography. She learned where everything was. The root cellar with its shelves of preserves that Ruth had made, and Cord hadn't touched. The binder of receipts and invoices on the desk in the back room, which was neither organized nor entirely disorganized. Just the natural accumulation of a man who paid his bills but didn't enjoy it. The routine 5 in the morning, coffee outside, back at 7 for breakfast, out again until noon, home for lunch which he did not eat if she didn't make it, back at dusk, dinner silence, bed. She started making lunch. Not because the agency had said to, but because the alternative was watching him drive away and come back thinner. The second week, she found the books, not the paperbacks in the kitchen, the actual books. There was a room off the hallway that she'd assumed was storage, but it was a study, and the study had floor-to-ceiling shelves on 2 walls. History mostly, some geography. A complete set of Canadian encyclopedia volumes from 1988 that were clearly consulted regularly because the spines were cracked in specific places. She was standing in the middle of this room when Cord appeared in the doorway. "Sorry," she said immediately. "I was looking for." "It's fine. You read all of these." Most of them. She looked at him differently after that. Not the way she'd looked at him at the fence post. Not that cautious assessment of a stranger, but with a kind of recalibration. There was a person in there. She'd been so focused on the arrangement, on surviving it, that she hadn't been paying enough attention to what the arrangement was actually made of. "I used to want to study history," she said. "At university. My mother needed help, so I switched to something more practical." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you switch to?" "Business administration. Very practical. Very boring." She pulled a thin volume from the shelf without thinking, something about the Hudson's Bay Company, and turned it over. "I liked knowing why things happened, the sequence of it. How one thing leads to something nobody expected." "That's still there," Cord said. "The wanting. You're still talking about it like it's present tense." She put the book back. "Maybe," she said. She went to make dinner. But she thought about what he'd said for the rest of the evening, and she thought he was right, and she hadn't expected him to be right about anything. The children arrived on the 3rd Friday, driven by Cord's sister June, who looked at Cecily with an expression that was equal parts pity and assessment, and had mastered the art of saying nothing pointed while meaning everything. Delia walked in first. She was 9, and she had her father's posture, straight-backed, contained, taking in the room before she committed to it. She looked at Cecily and said, "You're the one from the agency." "I am," Cecily said. "June says you're from Calgary. I was, before that, Lethbridge." Delia considered this. "Do you know how to braid hair?" "I do. My dad doesn't. He tries, but it goes sideways." From somewhere behind Delia, there was a sound that might have been Cord clearing his throat. Owen was 7, and he came in behind his sister, in the way of a person who has decided his sister will absorb most of the world's attention, and he will operate in the resulting quiet. He had a rock in his coat pocket. She could see the weight of it, and he showed it to her before he showed her his face. It was quartz, pale pink, shot through with something silver. "I found it by the east fence," he said. "It's a good one." "It really is," Cecily said. She held it for a moment and handed it back carefully. "Good weight." He put it back in his pocket with the satisfaction of someone whose taste has been correctly recognized. And after that, she and Owen were fine. The weekend was harder than the weekdays, but better than she'd thought. There were people in the house. The quiet had a different quality to it, occupied rather than empty. Delia did let her braid her hair, sitting in the kitchen on Saturday morning while Cord was outside, and Cecily did the braid slowly and well, the way her own mother had done it, and Delia sat very still. "Are you going to stay?" Delia asked. "For a while," Cecily said. "That's the plan. Dad doesn't make plans. He says they don't work. Sometimes they don't, but you still need them." Delia was quiet for a moment. "Mom used to say you have to show up even when you don't know what happens next." Cecily kept braiding. Her hands were steady. "Your mom sounds like she was smart," she said. "She was." A pause. "You smell different than her. She smelled like that blue soap from the pharmacy. You smell like the soap from the kitchen. That's because I've been washing dishes," Cecily said. And Delia laughed, short and surprised, and the sound of it moved through the house like something opening. November came hard. Snow first, then ice, then the particular cold of the Alberta foothills that isn't just temperature but atmosphere, the sense that the land has turned its back on you, and you're surviving on its indifference rather than any warmth. Cecily started on the binder. It took her 4 evenings to understand the system, 2 more to realize. The system had a structural problem. Specifically that 2 of Cord's suppliers had been overcharging him on a per-unit basis for 8 months, and he hadn't noticed because he paid by the total invoice, rather than checking the line items. She found the discrepancy on a Tuesday night and sat with it for a long time before she brought it to him. He was reading at the kitchen table when she set the 2 invoices side by side in front of him. "La Riviere feed," she said, "and the one out of Valley View. You've been paying the wrong rate since last March." He looked at the papers. He looked at her. "How much?" she told him. The number was significant. Not devastating, the land wasn't at risk from this alone. But it was the difference between the February bank review being a conversation and being an apology. His jaw tightened. He pressed his thumb against the corner of the invoice. "I should have caught that," he said. "You were doing everything by yourself. That's not an excuse." "No," she said, "but it's a reason." She sat down across from him. "I can draft the letters to both suppliers. Keep it professional. Ask for an accounting. See if they'll credit the difference. Most businesses will, rather than losing a client." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in how he was seeing her, the same recalibration she'd felt in the study, but larger. "You're good at this," he said. "I told you, business administration." She picked up the invoice. "Very practical. You said boring. Sometimes the boring things save you." He almost smiled again, but this time it reached his mouth. She drafted the letters that night at the kitchen table while he sat across from her with a book, and the lamp was warm, and the wind was outside, and she thought, "This is the strangest life I have ever been in, and it is not nothing." She didn't expect the trouble to have a name. Trouble rarely announces itself properly. His name was Boyd Ferris, and he'd been trying to acquire Cord's land for 3 years through means that ranged from legal to merely unpleasant. He was the kind of man who understood that if you apply pressure long enough and from enough angles, something eventually gives. And Cord had been alone long enough that he'd become a reliable target. Cecily met Boyd Ferris at the feed store in town on a Thursday afternoon in mid-November. She was there for the account, a simple errand, the kind she'd started doing because Cord hated town, and Boyd was at the counter, and somehow he knew who she was before she introduced herself. "You must be Cord's arrangement," he said, and the way he said it made the word feel small. She looked at him directly. Boyd Ferris was a big man who had learned that size could substitute for many things. He had the handshake of someone who measures other people's grip before he decides how to handle them. "I'm Cecily Vane," she said. "I manage the Aldgate household accounts." "That's so." He smiled. "How long you plan on being up here? It's a hard place for someone from the city. Cold gets inside you, people leave." "I'm not from the city originally," she said. "And I don't have anywhere to be." She paid for the account and left without looking back, but her hands were unsteady on the truck keys, and she drove 2 blocks before she pulled over and breathed for a moment. She told Cord that evening. He listened with his elbows on the table and his hands folded, and when she finished he was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd handled it wrong. "He's been talking to the bank," Cord said finally. "My contact there told me. Ferris has an offer in, if I default. Are you going to default? Not if the February review goes right, then we make it go right." She heard herself say we and didn't walk it back. He looked at her. "You signed up for accounts and meals," he said. "Not this. The accounts are connected to this," she said. "If Ferris gets the land because the numbers didn't line up right, then I did the accounts wrong. I don't do things wrong." It was a simpler thing to say than the actual truth, which was that somewhere in the past 6 weeks she had started to care what happened here. Not just as a job, as a place, as people. She didn't say that part yet. Boyd Ferris moved faster than she'd expected. The first thing was a rumor. She heard it secondhand from June, who'd heard it in Peace River, that Cord's arrangement was not what it appeared to be, and that the bank shouldn't put much stock in any numbers produced by someone who'd come through an agency. The implication was vague and therefore portable. It stuck to things. The second thing was a letter, addressed to Cord, from a lawyer in Grande Prairie, suggesting that there were questions about the property's boundary survey that had never been formally resolved. It was exactly the kind of letter that doesn't contain a direct threat, but costs money to answer. "He's trying to wear you down," Cecily said, reading the letter at the kitchen table. "I know, the boundary thing is probably nothing, but we'd need a surveyor to confirm it, and that takes time we don't have before February. I know that too." She looked up. "What do you want to do?" He was standing by the window, looking at the field in the way she'd come to understand, not vacancy, but thought. The field was where he thought. She'd noticed that it used to make her uneasy, the silences, but it didn't anymore. She'd learned to wait him out. "There's a man in Grimshaw," Cord said, "retired surveyor. He did the original work on this property in 1987. He'd know if there was a real issue or if Ferris is blowing smoke. Can he move quickly? If I ask right." A pause. "He knew my father." "Then ask right," Cecily said. "I'll handle the bank correspondence. And I want to talk to your contact there, the one who told you about Ferris's offer." "Can you arrange that?" He turned from the window. "You're not afraid of any of this," he said. It wasn't quite a question. She thought about the truth, which was that she was afraid of quite a lot, but had long ago learned that fear didn't exempt you from showing up. "I'm afraid of the things that matter," she said. "Boyd Ferris is just a man with money and a bad habit of thinking that's enough." Cord looked at her for a long moment. A different kind of looking than any he'd done before. Not assessment, not recalibration, something else. "All right," he said, "I'll call Grimshaw." The surveyor's name was Ernie Dalrymple, and he was 76, and he drove 3 hours in a half-ton that sounded like it was arguing with itself the whole way. He spent 4 hours on the property with equipment that Cecily couldn't name, and came inside at dusk for coffee that she made strong, the way she'd learned Cord liked it. "The boundary's clean," Ernie said, wrapping both hands around the mug. "Exactly where it was in 87. Ferris knows it too, or he should. His family's had land adjacent for 20 years. His daddy would have told him. So the letter," Cecily said. "Intimidation, pure and simple." Ernie looked at Cord over the rim of his mug. "Your father would have told him to go to hell by now. I'm saying it politely," Cord said. "On legal letterhead. That works too, I suppose." Ernie looked at Cecily. "You the one who did the account work?" "I am. Cord showed me the numbers on the drive. February should be fine if the price holds." He set down his mug. "Not a lot of people would come out here and take this on. It's a good property," she said. Ernie looked between them in the way of a man who has seen many things and is seeing something here that he recognizes but won't name. "It is," he said, and nothing else. After he drove away, they stood on the porch in the cold for a moment, both of them watching the taillights disappear down the road. "Thank you," Cord said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at where the truck had been. "You don't have to thank me. I know I don't have to." A pause. "Cecily." She waited. "I don't know what I thought this arrangement was going to be," he said. "Before you came, I thought it was going to be functional. Something that worked on paper." "It does work on paper," she said. "The numbers are better. That's not what I mean." She knew that wasn't what he meant. She'd known it for a while. She looked at her hands on the porch railing, the cold working its way through her gloves. "I know what you mean," she said. "I'm not going to pretend I don't." He was quiet. The fields were dark now, and the sky above them was the deep blue-black of a clear Alberta night, with more stars than you could convince yourself were real. "The 6 months," he said. "Yes, that was the arrangement. Yes. What do you want to do about it?" He finally looked at her. There was nothing guarded in it now, just a man asking a real question and waiting for a real answer, and willing to accept whatever it was. She thought about the binder of receipts. She thought about Delia sitting still while she braided her hair. She thought about Owen's pink quartz rock, and the copy of the stone angel she still hadn't touched, and the way the house had started to feel like a place she was building, rather than occupying. She thought about a man at a fence post who didn't know how to be waited for, and a woman who'd always been waiting for the right thing to wait for. "I want to stay," she said. Not because of the arrangement, in spite of it. Cord Aldgate was not a man who reached for things easily. But he reached for her hand on the railing, and held it, and neither of them said anything else for a while, and the cold was just cold, and the stars were just stars, and for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. February came the way it always does in northern Alberta, without apology. The bank review was on the 14th. Cecily dressed carefully that morning, not because she was nervous, but because the numbers were good, and she wanted to look like someone who knew the numbers were good. Cord wore the jacket he wore to town for serious things. They drove in together, and the road was clear. The meeting lasted 40 minutes, The loan officer's name was Patricia Greer, and she had the particular quality of a person who has seen many things and been surprised by fewer of them than she expected. She read the account documents Cecily had prepared. She asked 6 questions, all of them specific, all of them answered. At the end, she sat back and looked at Cord. "You've put the operation in better shape than it was in 2023, she said. "That's the short version." Boyd Ferris's offer went nowhere. They stopped at the diner in town on the way back. Not to celebrate, exactly, but because neither of them wanted to go straight home, and because the kind of relief that comes after sustained dread needs somewhere to sit for a moment before you carry it back into your life. Cecily ordered coffee and pie she didn't eat. Cord ordered the same. They sat across from each other in a booth by the window and watched the town go by at its own slow pace and didn't feel the need to fill the silence. "Delia wants to teach you to ride," Cord said eventually. "She told me. Last weekend. She doesn't offer that to people, I know." Cecily turned her coffee cup in its saucer. "Owen wants to show me the east fence, where he found the rock. That's his place. He goes there when he wants to think. He's 7 and he goes places to think. He's his mother's son in that way." Cord said it evenly, without weight, not avoided, not leaned into, just said. She thought hard about things, quietly. You'd never know until she'd already decided. Cecily looked at him. "He's your son in that way, too." Cord was quiet for a moment. Maybe. Outside, a truck went by with 2 dogs in the back, sitting very upright, watching everything with tremendous seriousness. Cecily pointed. Cord looked. They both laughed. Real laughter, at the same time the kind that doesn't require explanation. She thought, this is how it starts. Not with grand gestures. With dogs in trucks and shared pie and a man who has slowly, carefully let someone back into the house he'd been keeping too quiet for too long. She thought. I showed up not knowing what would happen next. This is what happened, and I would not change the order of it. Spring came late, the way it does, but it came. The morning she and Owen walked the east fence to see where he'd found the quartz. The ground was soft and the creek was running, and the light came sideways through the new leaves, at an angle that turned everything briefly gold. Owen walked ahead of her at the particular pace of a child who knows exactly where he's going and is allowing you to follow. He stopped at a point along the fence where the earth had washed away slightly and left a ledge of exposed rock. "Here," he said, and crouched down, and she crouched beside him. The rock in the ledge was layered, gray and rose and silver-white, ancient in the way that nothing manufactured can be. Owen ran his thumb along a seam of quartz that branched out like a river delta. "Do you think it goes all the way down?" he asked. "Probably," she said. "Rock goes down a long way. We only ever see the top." He thought about this. "That's kind of nice," he said, "that there's more." She sat with that for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "It really is." Owen stood and put his hands in his pockets, his shoulders settling into a posture she recognized from his father, that particular piece of someone who has gotten what they came for. He started back toward the house. She stayed one more moment at the fence. 800 acres. The creek. The particular sound the wind made through the new leaves. A house that was full now in a way it hadn't been, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, the way warmth comes back to a room. She turned and followed Owen up the rise toward home, and the ground was soft under her feet, and the sky above them was the wide and open blue of a northern spring morning, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be.